Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Blair, or the Illuminati, and today we're going to be talking about a Ponzi scheme, DC Solar. Now, in case you don't know what a Ponzi scheme is, I don't have a lot of Ponzi scheme videos on the channel to be totally honest, but the FBI defines it on their website. Ponzi schemes promise high financial returns or dividends not available through traditional investments. Instead of investing the funds on victims, however, the con artist pays dividends to initial investors using the funds of subsequent investors. The scheme generally falls apart when the operator flees with all the proceeds or when a sufficient number of new investors cannot be found to allow the continued payment of dividends. But DC Solar wasn't just any Ponzi scheme though. They raked up almost $1 billion, and some of that money was from none other than Warren Buffett himself. So today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most famous and most notorious Ponzi schemes that has ever existed. So let's dive right in and see how DC Solar all began. Let's get into it. DC Solar is a bit of an enigma to start with. The founder, Jeffrey Karpov, doesn't have a Wikipedia page, nor does his wife Paulette. Almost every single article that I found on this topic has to do with their arrest and the end of this gigantic company, rather than who they were and what exactly they did. Everybody Wiki says they were founded in 2005 in Concord, California, but that was one of the only sources I found that had any information whatsoever, and Everyone Wiki is definitely not what I would consider a reliable source. Thankfully, the lawsuit from the Securities and Exchange Commission against them is available online to shed some light on the situation, so that's where we have to start. On page 6, the lawsuit states that since 2011 all the way up to the very end of 2018, DC Solar offered securities to investors. These securities took the form of two types of investment contracts: investment fund contracts and sale-leaseback contracts. Under both arrangements, the investors paid to purchase generators from DC Solutions while simultaneously leasing them to DC Distribution. DC Distribution would then purportedly arrange to sublease the generators to end users. The investors expected to profit from investments due to tax credits, depreciation on the generators, and lease payments. Investors thus played an entirely passive role. The success of the venture, and thus the profits to investors and DC Solar, turned entirely on the efforts of DC Solar to make, maintain, market, and lease the generators. And that is a lot of technical word vomit here, but bear with me. There's one important thing they mention, which is tax credits. When you install a solar energy system, you're allowed to deduct 26% of the cost from federal taxes. That's pretty sweet, right? This is because of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. It was only going to last for a couple years, but Congress has renewed it 1,000,000 times, and now homeowners just have this tax credit until 2021, and this might just be renewed again. It's pretty much a way to encourage solar energy with tax incentives. So these tax credits, combined with costs being lower as the years go on, being environmentally friendly, all that good stuff, has led to 9 out of 10 adults being in favor of expanding solar power use. There's job growth there too, so there's plenty of things to support and to be supported with. So DC Solar took advantage of this and people began to invest. Over the course of gathering up investors, DC Solar raised about $910 million in investor money. These deals had face values of more than $2.7 billion because investors in the investment fund contracts finance approximately 70% of the amounts of their investments through promissory notes. And this is where Warren Buffett comes into play. One of the large media selling points to this case was Warren Buffett, a name you might recognize even if you have no idea who he is. He is one of the world's richest men, a celebrated philanthropist, and has started learning about business when he was just 11 years old. And I'm not even kidding, that's when he first apparently bought some shares of City Service and sold them for a small profit. When the stock skyrocketed, he later said it was an early lesson in patience in investing. Between 2006 and 2017, he gave away almost $28 billion to charities, which is insane, and he's pledged to give away 99% of his wealth to charitable causes, and his investment portfolio includes the likes of Apple, Bank of America, and Coca-Cola. In other words, this man's got some stupid money, just insane amounts we can't even begin to imagine or try to even understand. It's so much. Having a name like Warren Buffett attached to your company is fantastic though, because, well, think about it. If you're in a new industry that's growing and you want to stand out from the competition and gain investors, all you really have to say is, well, Warren Buffett invested in our company, and because he's so rich and successful and powerful, it builds a sense of trust with these newer, more naive investors. Obviously, this is me speculating here, but if someone told me they started a company and Bill Gates invested millions in them, I most certainly would take them a little bit more seriously than not having a company with Bill Gates involved, you know what I mean? So DC Solar got a gigantic leg up, not just because of the money, but the names attached to it, and Warren Buffett wasn't the only one. According to the Sacramento Bee, some of the nation's most sophisticated investors got conned by DC Solar Solutions Inc., the bankrupt, crooked company that made mobile generators powered by solar panels. Court records and financial statements reveal roughly a dozen companies fell for DC Solar's promises of profits and tax benefits, from a $43 billion Pasadena bank to a Philadelphia company with expertise investing in solar farms. DC Solar's rise and fall is a tale of greed perpetuated by a little-known former auto mechanic, his wife, and a small group of employees in Benicia, a working-class town on Suisun Bay against some of corporate America's deepest pockets. For consumers and investors, the scheme shows how even the savviest investors can be ensnared by the promise of an easy windfall. DC Solar's generators were attractive to investors mainly as tax shelters. A provision in the federal tax code allowed investors to take generous tax credits on solar energy investments. The law is designed to spur green technology to lower the output of global warming greenhouse gases. But when federal investigators discovered that most of DC Solar generators they bought were non-existent, the company had to forfeit the tax credits and write bigger checks to Uncle Sam. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Sacramento said more than $500 million in tax revenue has been returned to the Treasury by DC Solar investors, and more is expected. Berkshire, the company owned by Warren Buffett, had to add $377 million to its tax bill after finding out the income taxes weren't valid as well. Progressive Corp lost all $156 million. All these following numbers are millions, by the way. Sherwin-Williams 77, Hancock Whitney Banking 9, East West Bank Corp 30, Party Resources 7.7, Meta Financial Group 9.5, Valley National Bancorp 12, and United Financial Bancorp lost 15. Now again, I'm just speculating here, but I think the reason there wasn't quite as much information about this case, or people don't seem as worked up about it as they really should be, is because of this exact type of list. It's just a bunch of corporations. They are faceless companies that make more than most of us could ever dream in our lifetimes, and it's impossible to identify with, in other words. So if you hear about an average Joe getting scammed out of his life savings, you're more likely to feel sympathetic to him rather than a company who loses the same amount of money because it's a drop in the bucket for them. Now again, this is just my opinion, but I think this could be one of the reasons as to why there may not have been as much of an uproar or emotional reaction to this compared to other famous Ponzi schemes. Aside from these businesses, there's another company that had a huge role in this, Nascar. John Wall Street said that it was unclear if DC Solar pursued them because they were serious car enthusiasts, as we'll see in a little bit, or if it's because they could genuinely provide products for them. Since they only host a couple large-scale events a year, permanent lighting fixtures aren't worth the investment. And to their credit, DC Solar did actually provide some of the products they said they would, which is shocking, I know, but just not nearly as many as they claimed they did. Regardless, DC Solar purchasing NASCAR sponsorships again played into their legitimacy. After all, you probably wouldn't expect a phony scam on the front of a NASCAR racer's car hood. One interview from INC actually contacted Jeff Karpoff and got an interview with him before the scam came to light. Not only does it mention the NASCAR situation, but it reveals a bit more about Jeff himself as a person. An auto mechanic by trade, Karpoff started Roverland USA and built the company into one of the largest independent certified Land Rover and Jaguar repair facilities in the country. When he sold that business, a previous customer asked if Jeff was interested in getting involved in the solar panel business. It turned out he was. Jeff told the interviewer, "I wanted to do something different than automotive, and solar sounded like fun. So even though I didn't have much of a sales background, I jumped in. Over time, we had some success. For example, we sold a megawatt worth of solar panels to Spain. Then one day, a neighbor in the Sierra Nevada mountains said he was interested in putting in a solar system. Back then, the panels were really expensive. People were stealing them all the time, and he was concerned about someone stealing his panels since he only lived there on the weekends. I said, maybe we can put a system on a trailer and you could pull it in and out of your barn. Even as I said it, it sounded kind of stupid, but it gave me an idea. So after he left, I went in the houses and said to my wife, I want to build a solar system on a trailer with generators and batteries that will replace diesel generators. I was a mechanic and had decent fabrication skills. I had owned a body shop, was fairly good at building things, knew about welding and paint. So the next day I went to Sacramento and bought a trailer and some steel. A few weeks later, a previous client called and asked if I could outfit some of his emergency equipment vehicles. He found out what I was doing and said, wait, will it power emergency phone systems, water purification systems? I said, sure, it can power a 1,500 square foot house. He said, we have a show coming up and we'd love to set it up and demonstrate that we can provide remote power. So that's what we did, and it got an extremely positive response. So here's what we can gather from this interview. It shows that Jeff, at least initially, may have actually had decent intentions for his business. It makes me wonder if he was just stupid at first, getting all this money and then not following up on his word, or if he really did have malicious intentions from the very first penny someone put into the company. They brought their generators to an MTV concert with Pink, provided power for movie sets, and did, according to Jeff, $60 million in sales. I can really only guess what the hell could have gone so wrong, but it seems like at least in the early days, they got hooked on the money. Jeff says at the end he feels great providing jobs for people, but he had to have known that it was all based on a lie and simply wanting the fame and money, that eventually everything would be lost, right? In early 2020, NBC Sports actually reported on this as well and said the following. DC Solar was a company that built and leased solar energy equipment and also sponsored Chip Ganassi Racing in the Cup and Xfinity series. It was the primary or co-primary sponsor for Kyle Larson in the 16 Cup races and for 3 races with Jamie McMurray in 2018. It also sponsored 10 Xfinity races with Ganassi and announced in November 2018 it would sponsor Ross Chastain's full-time ride in 2019. It also sponsored Xfinity Series races in 2018 at Phoenix Raceway and Las Vegas Motor Speedway and the infield fan grounds at Richmond Raceway. In the wake of the raids and the company filing for bankruptcy in January 2019, CGR was forced to close its Xfinity operation. During the nearly 8-year scheme, the plea agreement says the Karpoffs used the money generated from it to buy their NASCAR sponsorships, 150 luxury and collectible vehicles, and luxury real estate in Lake Tahoe, Las Vegas, the Caribbean, and Mexico. So it's pretty obvious that the Karpoffs bought a lot, and that's where all their money was going by the looks of things too. It, went to themselves rather than, the company they were supposedly running. Aside from all the properties, they also purchased a suite at a professional football stadium, a subscription private jet service, the Martinez California Clippers minor league baseball team, and a 2018 performance by an internationally known rapper at a company holiday party. The wealth here was absolutely insane and over the top. I don't know if it's simply greed getting to them or if the Karpoffs always felt this way. Nevertheless, the list includes cars, jewelry, jets, condos, vacation homes, mansions in Vegas, a boat. The list goes on and on and on. I don't know how they expected not to get caught, but at the same time, I'm not sure how they weren't caught sooner. Plus, Jeff Karpoff often pulled out up to $2,000 in cash at staff meetings, challenged employees to guess how much he was holding, and handed the wad to whoever made the best guess within $50, according to Bloomberg. So, it's tacky. Who does that? I don't know how they expected not to be caught, but at the same time, I, again, don't know how they weren't caught sooner. Thankfully, the tables eventually turned. A 2016 U.S. Transportation Department news release described DC Solar as among some of the most innovative folks in the private sector. But by the end of 2018, they were raided by the FBI and it all came crashing down. So now, heading back to that lawsuit here, we see that DC Solar apparently marketed themselves as having extensive experience in the field when we just heard Jeff say in an interview from his own mouth that he jumped right into it because it sounded fun. But right around page 13 of this lawsuit is where things start to get very interesting and truly malicious. It reads the following. Investors paid DC Solutions over $910 million in cash and took on promissory notes to DC Solutions for roughly $1.8 billion for the generators over the course of the scheme. However, because DC Distribution continued to fail in its attempts to lease the generators to legitimize end users' insignificant numbers, DC Solutions had virtually ceased production of new generators on any scale by sometime in 2016. In fact, recent efforts by investors to locate their generators turned up only 6,571 of the over 17,600 generators that were purportedly purchased. The overwhelming majority of generators that DC Solar sold to investors were not manufactured. Indeed, for 8 of the investment funds that closed after late 2016 with a total transaction size of nearly $1 billion, none of the approximately 6,575 generators they purchased were found. For another investment fund that closed in July 2018, just 90 of the approximate 2,280 generators it purchased were found. In total, across the investment fund contracts and sale-leaseback contracts, the inventory located only about 37% of the generators that were sold by DC Solutions. Thus, investors collectively paid more than $1.6 billion through cash contributions and promissory notes to DC Solutions for non-existent generators. The Karpoffs took numerous steps to hide from investors the fact that the generators had not been manufactured. So what this is saying is it's an extremely lengthy way of saying most of the generators they promised were never turned up. So there's one of their giant lies. Seriously, DC Solar, y'all had one job: deliver on the products you promised, to be a legitimate company. But there's an entire section right below this one titled "The Karpoffs Made False Statements to Investors," so I guess this became a habit of theirs real quick. On page 14, it says that Paulette Karpoff signed agreements to fool investors into believing their investments were legitimate when she was fully aware of their bank records and knew they couldn't provide generators to scale. She made misleading statements, and Jeff Karpoff arranged for false certifications. Again, this wasn't a mistake. They didn't accidentally take on more than they could handle. This was a lie and a total scam. Page 17 details Jeff manipulating VIN numbers. The next page talks about hiding lease revenue, and there's fraudulent transfers after that, false financial statements after that. Basically, any lie you could make in business, the Karpoffs made. The income statements for DC Distribution accompanying the compilation reports falsely stated that DC Distribution generated hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue in rental income. In reality, the overwhelming majority of the purported rental income consisted of intercompany transfers between DC Solutions and DC Distribution. In meetings and calls with brokers and/or prospective investors, Jeff Karpoff falsely claimed that demand for generators was huge and touted leasing relationships with various customers. And a broker working on behalf of DC Solar prepared these misleading pitch books, versions of which were both reviewed by Jeff and Paulette Karpoff at various points in time. If the investors who had heard these pitches or received pitch books knew the true circumstances, they would not have purchased investment contracts from DC Solar. Mercury News summed up the whole ordeal nicely when they wrote, "The Karpoffs, along with several co-conspirators, oversold, making transactions to sell $2.5 billion worth of solar panels or 17,000 units. They didn't have that many to give to clients, so they tried to dupe inspectors by switching serial numbers around on their existing stock," prosecutors say. All in all, they bought $912 million in revenue before the scheme was thwarted, prosecutors say. Again, it's lucky for them they weren't caught sooner. With all the evidence against them, the Karpoffs had no choice but to plead guilty to money laundering. The IRS wrote that as of April 15, 2020, over $50 million worth of assets were seized on March 24th. In total, $120 million in assets were forfeited by the Karpoffs, which is the largest criminal forfeiture in the history of the Eastern District of California. So, I guess you could say that that's impressive, like not in a good way, but it is impressive. Now, these two were supposed to be sentenced May 19th of 2020, but I'm guessing because of COVID, that's been obviously delayed because I haven't seen any sentences come out for a while when I search for one. The Karpoffs agreed to pay between $800 million and $1.6 billion to their victims, as if they're ever going to be able to salvage from whatever they have left, but Jeff's attorney stated that when the business grew, it simply overwhelmed him and he tried to salvage the business and failed, but I wouldn't give him that much credit, to be perfectly honest. It feels like he really did know what he was doing and that it was wrong and illegal, then continued to get investors to give him money, and so I just have no sympathy for the guy. After all, there's a reason why con artists can do this easily and get away with it for so long. As one journalist, Susan Seligson, says, when asked if she believes most Ponzi schemers are sociopaths, they are like the mythical narcissist whose punishment by the gods was to fall in love with his reflection, which dissolved upon touch. One of their main features is lack of empathy for other people. I believe from what I read that some of these con artists are addicts. If one story fails, then there is another. They don't see failure as the end of a venture. It's simply a signal that the time has come to create something else. Now, another point you could make is that people in legitimate business can also benefit from being, at least to some degree, manipulative. It's unfortunate, but there's no denying business is ruthless and very cutthroat. So what makes Ponzi schemes different? What made the Karpoffs different from other business people? Susan had an answer for that too. One of the difficulties in discovering these schemers is that they are so close to, quote, normal people. As I wrote in the new book, we all laugh at a joke that we don't think is funny. Children play make-believe or manipulate parents into buying a toy. So these scammers are like all of us in many ways. But these people are different in that they don't feel what other people feel. An example I give in the book is Marie Antoinette. She could not understand why the hungry people who asked for bread when there was no bread and didn't eat cake. She couldn't imagine anything like that she did not experience, and she had never starved. I don't know if I'll truly understand why or how someone can do this to another person, and I won't pretend I've never told a lie in my entire life, but this lack of empathy and living a lie for so long, it's just not impressive. It's just kind of sad and it sucks. So right now, it remains unfinished. We don't know because the sentencing was never completed. We don't know how many years they're possibly getting or what number they theoretically will actually owe back to all the people that they scammed. So as far as the story goes for right now, that is where we're ending. Because there's not much going on, it's not really talked about a lot, even though it's really interesting, and that's all we have in terms of factual information. So unless there's another update sometime soon in the future or some other cat gets let out of some kind of bag, that's where we're going to end today's video, guys. And I hope you did enjoy taking a look at this Ponzi scheme because this one is so interesting and I feel like it's not talked about nearly as much as it should be. So if you guys liked today's video, hit that like button. If you guys are new here, hit that subscribe button. If you guys want to look at more information from me, including all the sources made to create today's video, links for everything is in the description box down below. So again, thank you guys for making it to another video. Love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!